Ashton here with Love, Life and Disability. And welcome back to another episode of Love, Life and Disability with me, Kay Ashton. And today I'm joined by a previous colleague of mine, John. So John, welcome. It's been forever.
It's so good to be on your show, Kay. Thank you so much for inviting me.
No, it's my pleasure. So we go back absolutely years. So we used to work together, and I think we had a ball. It was pretty cool.
Absolutely, no, those were the good times back in the day.
I miss those days. I really do. But
absolutely
we're both in obviously very different places now, and John himself is also a podcaster. So John has the podcast which is Different Minds.
Yep.
And it's neurodiversity based. Yeah. And John is neurodiverse himself.
It's interesting, isn't it? I guess we all are neurodiverse in one sense. And actually, I guess when you're referring to, someone that perhaps is a neurodivergent, then you'd be talking about someone that's autistic or, that kind of thing. But I identify as a neurotypical. But I guess as you say, neurodiversity is a term, and everyone is neurodiverse in that sense. But I guess I wouldn't describe myself as a neurodivergent, But obviously, all these things are just labels at the end of the day.
And that's interesting that you say that about labels and words, because there are lots of words out there. So if we're to take neurodivergent, for example. A lot of people who are neurodivergent with maybe autism, Asperger's, dyslexia, don't actually classify themselves as having a disability. For example, I'm just neurodivergent. I'm not disabled.
Yes.
And it's really interesting how people perceive words. And even though obviously Equality Acts, it would be recognised as a disability. Even similar with HIV, it's a disability, but people don't see it as that.
Yeah, it's such a good point, because language is constantly evolving, isn't it? And it's changing on a weekly basis, and sometimes people are afraid in terms of they don't want to offend anyone or upset anyone by the language that they use. And essentially, language will continue to develop, and these are. And I guess we're in a society where people can self-identify, and and that's ultimately a good thing. But also, you talked about disability there, and the autism. Let's talk about autism, because essentially, autism is, often in society we've seen autism, as you say, as a disability, as something that needs to be treated. It's almost like the medical model of disability, which means that as a society we need to help people that are disabled. We need to offer them support and treat them. Where actually we're going towards there's a big shift in society now, where we're going to a more social model of disability, where actually it's more about what society can do as a whole to support people that are neurodivergent, and it's not something that needs to be treated or fixed.
No, I totally agree. And I feel as well, COVID has really helped out a lot in getting disability on the agenda. And of course, as recently, Elon Musk has also basically said in one of his first interviews that, he's Asperger's. And it's great that we are getting people whom people can look up to. Basically saying, hey, I've got it, but it's look at what he has achieved.
Yeah, absolutely.
It hasn't held him back.
Yeah, I mean, that was a massive news, wasn't it, last week in May, when Elon Musk came out as, that he has Asperger's, obviously a term that is still used in America. And I think it's great that we have role models, and and also I think it's important to say that the thing about autism is it's a spectrum. And you have people that are on one end of the spectrum that have got high support needs and that are non-verbal, and at the other end of the spectrum you've got autistic people that are autistic advocates, maybe like Elon Musk, that are able to articulate and talk about what it's like to be them. And I think it's important to remember that this is a spectrum, and everyone's got a unique and a personal experience, and and not everyone is verbal.
Mhm.
And yeah, but that's, I think it's important to kind of to remember that this is a spectrum, and that, one person's perspective on autism is maybe completely different to another person's perspective. Yeah,
Totally agree.
yeah,
And touching upon there with like autism as well is, I've come across so many, as I guess they would also say themselves, is where it's like high functioning,
yeah,
where they're like super, super intelligent and it's like, wow. Or where they memorize detail and it's that level of stuff. And because of their autism, they've been able to do that. And it's absolutely incredible. And as you say, you've got different spectrums. So I have come across people super intelligent, but they're also mute. They can't talk, they're non-verbal. And you may get a day once in a blue moon where they're able to express words. And it's amazing, the spectrum. But I think that's again, like with a lot of disabilities, once you meet somebody with one disability, let's say in a wheelchair, the
yeah,
universal symbol, of course,
yeah,
that's one person. They
yeah,
may work, they may not work.
yeah,
And I think
absolutely,
society a lot of the time will put them labels on people that
yeah,
we can't
yeah,
do things.
absolutely.
And it's trying to look at the positivity of what we can do as opposed to what we
Yeah.
can't do.
Yeah, absolutely. I think you made a really good point there, and I want to go back to it because since we were talking about language, so often even words like high functioning and low functioning, I
Yeah.
guess as a society we're going away from using words like that as well, because ultimately, if someone has, that term, let's take a look at the term high functioning autism. It suggests that people are high functioning, and actually, they do often, people that are referred to as high functioning do have, they do need support. They do struggle on a daily basis.
Yeah.
And the terms, in terms of the language that we're using now, it's kind of, people with autism with high or low support needs is kind of the terminology that we're using now, as opposed to talking about whether someone's functioning or not. So you can see that, again, that's just another example of
Yeah.
how language is constantly evolving.
And do you think with language continuously evolving that it's always going to be literally education non-stop for people because it is always adapting and some of these stuff are happening, not like every single day or anything. Well, there could
Yeah,
be in some cases, but
yeah,
it's happening a fair bit.
yeah,
Do you think sometimes that's why society sometimes don't know how to interact or what to say because one minute this term's okay, but then
yeah,
several months later they'll use that same term and people are like, dude, that's totally out of fashion. Now you can't be using that. You shouldn't be saying it.
yeah, yeah. And no, I think you're right. I think it's people who are scared of offending people, and I think you have to. Most people don't want to offend or insult people. They just want to try and I think it's important that we shouldn't shy away from talking about these issues like
Mhm.
you and I are doing. And it's only by doing that that we can break down some of the misconceptions and the stigma around neurodiversity, essentially. And also, you talked about, yeah, someone with superpowers as well. And it's interestingly because I'm bringing out a future podcast on my Different Minds podcast series that looks at kind of media representation of neurodivergent individuals. And often in the media, if you see an autistic person in the media, they're either a superhuman that's got these super skills and super intelligent, or they are someone with high support needs
Yeah.
that are non-verbal. It's either one extreme or the other.
But they can be
And
both.
yes, yes. And that's the thing, the media often portray very stereotypical
Yeah.
views, as you know, Kay. And, I'm really passionate about working with the media to, make sure that we portray, all sorts of disabilities on screen, and
Totally.
also make sure that people, on the spectrum are part of the focus groups, are part of
They need to be
the
in the conversations,
exactly.
how to be represented as well.
Yeah, exactly.
It's one question I've always thought is obviously like dyslexia, for example, it's a hidden disability, is
Yeah.
how would you look to portray dyslexia on TV without probably saying, I don't know, if they're asked to read something as part of their character, oh, I
Yeah.
can't read that, I have dyslexia. or
yeah.
maybe the colours and stuff. It's how could you portray dyslexia on screen?
That is such a good point. And last week I was interviewing Adam Frost. He presents Gardener's World for the BBC, and he's got dyslexia. And he was saying often, as it's phrased as a negative thing, and
It's a positive.
and it's a positive.
Makes
And
us so creative.
yeah, and he was saying, you're so spot on, Kate, because he was saying that's enabled him to be such a creative gardener because of the fact that he's got dyslexia, and it's given him so many strengths, and that's one of the reasons he's doing so well in his career. And I think we should focus on the positives rather than the
Yeah,
negatives. Yeah,
totally agree. But
yeah,
like, let's say somebody was in EastEnders
yeah,
and the character was to have a hidden disability like
yeah.
dyslexia. How could the character portray that?
I think it's a good point. And you know what? To be fair on the media, it's almost like the media get persecuted
Mm?
for whatever they do, and I think it's difficult because there is as we just said, no one is the same, and
No.
disability is a very personal thing. And I think whatever the media do, they often people criticize them, and ultimately you can't portray everything in the
No.
media. Yeah, we can't, so you have to have that understanding that the media can't portray every single person on the spectrum because we are all so different. But
Yeah.
I think, as you said before, it's about involving people in the conversation from the very beginning, making them part of the production, and letting them sort of come up with the ideas for representation.
Hmm.
I also interviewed Christopher Eccleston recently
Okay.
from Salford, and I interviewed him about the A Word, which was on BBC One, which is an autism drama.
Yeah. Love that drama.
It was great, wasn't it? It was brilliant, and I think Christopher Eccleston
They
is amazing.
really worked so with the cast and the crew,
Yeah,
and
yeah,
they were fantastic.
yeah, and there were people with Down syndrome actors in that drama, and people with autism.
Yeah.
But there was criticism, Kay, because the main it's about for anyone that's not seen it, it's about a little boy with autism, and it's about how his family come to terms with the fact that he receives an autism diagnosis. But the little boy was he's neurotypical, in real life. And there was criticism that why are you using neurotypicals to play autistic characters, but and there's arguments for and against that, and that's the whole point of acting, isn't it, that you put yourself in someone else's shoes. But I do think, having said that though, I do think the BBC and other media organizations need to be more inclusive,
Hmm.
need to be more flexible with their filming schedules, so that people, neurodivergent individuals, can be more represented on screen.
Yeah. And I think that is, if you was to get a job and you've got a disability, you'd have a reasonable adjustment in place.
Yeah,
End of line.
yeah,
We need to be seeing these reasonable adjustments brought in into film, into sets on how
yeah,
things are going to be met. If we're to take Casualty, for example,
yeah,
I will know that let's not take Casualty, let's take Hollyoaks.
yeah.
So in Hollyoaks,
Work on that.
we've got the lady, and she's got autism,
Yep,
and Hollyoaks give autism awareness training to the whole of
yeah,
the crew, the whole of the cast,
yeah,
to help them out. That was part of their reasonable adjustments, and they know how to engage,
yeah,
how to work and educate.
yeah,
Moving it back to Casualty, you've got Gabrielle Leon,
yeah,
who is profoundly deaf.
yeah,
They taught people basic sign language, so the camera crew will basically use sign language such as camera,
yeah,
rehearsal,
yeah,
recording, so
yes,
then she knows when to come on and when to leave and what
yeah,
specifically she is doing depending
yeah,
on her environment.
yeah,
And you make those adjustments because you kind of have to, but
yeah.
it's we don't see it all the time, and it does need to be improved.
Absolutely. And like, take for example, one of the arguments for the A Word was that perhaps the filming schedule would be too hectic for a young boy with autism, and that's why they decided to go with a neurotypical. And actually, I don't think that argument particularly stands up because as you said, well, we'll make the film schedule more flexible. so that we can accommodate
Yeah.
people's needs, essentially. Yeah.
So what would you say the difference is between neurotypical, just for us and our audience? Because just going on sideways tracks sometimes, a lot of people will kick off in the media whereby you'll get somebody that's not disabled playing a disabled character,
Yeah.
or maybe the incorrect disabilities sometimes where they've got a disability, but it's not that specific disability that they're portraying. Is Would you say this is what people are trying to state with the neurotypical side of things? Oh, they're not autistic. Like, what is neurotypical known as?
So I think it's all about power, essentially, and it's. I think things are changing, but it kind of like with most things in life, it's about who holds the power, essentially, and I think it's about changing that narrative, and often it's in the past it's been neurotypical people that have been devising kind of the diagnosis criteria for neurodivergence. And as you just said before, it's about involving neurodivergence in the conversation from the beginning, in the same way that the media, I think the media is becoming more diverse now, and we're having a more broader range of people working in the media, and it's only by involving them and actually allowing them to produce content that we become more we become more representative as an organization, and I think that's ultimately the way that we need to go. And I think that our understanding of disabilities is getting better. People like you and I were having this conversation
Yeah,
now. People are talking more and realizing that it's actually okay to be different, and we should be celebrating our strengths and not just focusing
definitely.
on the weaknesses. Yeah.
For me, I guess it's kind of like a SWOT analysis. It's, you've got your strengths, you've got your opportunities, and
Yeah.
really play to your weaknesses. You
Yeah.
can easily make them into strengths, or look at your threats, what's going on out there, and your
Yeah.
opportunities.
Yeah.
And it's like we're both podcasters, we're both doing disability subjects.
Yeah.
We're not really a threat to each other, but people
Yeah.
could say you are, because it's
Yeah.
two disabled
Yeah.
podcasts, well, disabilities, and in one space, some people would
Yeah.
argue. But at the
Yeah.
same time, no, we've both got different content, and it's out there to support each other and drive that conversation forward.
Definitely. And do you know what, Kate? I set up this podcast because, I may not be neurodivergent, but I'm from a working class background, in Yorkshire, and I know what it's like to be different, and I think it's about celebrating that difference, and yeah, I try and provide a platform for conversation, a safe space for people to talk about what it's like to be them. And I've been lucky to interview people like Chris Packham, the television presenter, and he talked to me about his Asperger's. And there's some incredible people out there that've got such amazing stories to tell. But it's about changing the conversation, and not seeing disability as something that needs to be treated, essentially.
No.
Yeah.
And that's the thing. It's just I always say it's like, look at the ability. So
Yeah.
it's like crossing out the this. It's look at the ability of everything
Yeah.
that we can do and offer.
Yeah.
And
Definitely. Yeah.
it's
Yeah.
definitely looking at the positives. So what's
Yeah.
next with you and your podcasts at the moment? Like, who's coming up? Who's been your best person so far that you've interviewed? And I guess
Wow.
what's one of the most biggest thing you've learned?
Yeah. So, wow, I've had so many interesting people on my podcast, but probably one of them that stood out the most was Temple Grandin. Have you heard of Temple Grandin?
No.
So Temple Grandin is, wow, where do you start? So there was a Hollywood film made about her 10 years ago, and she is an autistic individual in America, and she's a scientist, and she basically was one of the first people in the 70s and 80s to kind of almost become like an autism advocate, and she would
Right.
speak out about what it's like to be her and to be different, and what it's like to be built in a world that's not built for you. And she challenged all those conceptions. She went on to get a PhD. She's now a professor.
Wow.
She's now a top government consultant in the US of A. She travels the world giving talks, and that's not bad for someone that was written off, at an
Yeah.
early age for being disabled. She was non-verbal to the age of 4, and she turned that round into a positive, and she's just an absolute trailblazer, to be honest. Yeah.
Wow.
So yeah, if you get chance, Kay, to listen to that, I think you would really enjoy it. Yeah.
No, definitely. I do like listening to the podcast, so I need
Thank
to listen to more and more.
you. Thank you. And yeah, in terms of what's coming up, there's so many people that I want to speak to, and there was also a lady in America called Johnson, this Black autism advocate, and she's very passionate about talking about intersectionality.
So important.
Yeah. And and again, my podcast is about breaking down some of these complicated terms, like what is intersectionality. And she was talking about being a marginalized individual because she's Black, but also she's even more of a marginalized individual because she's an autistic female.
Yeah.
And she was saying how the police treat her differently in America because of the fact that she's got autism and the fact that she's Black. So this is where intersectionality is, where all those aspects come together, essentially. Yeah.
It's so, so important because a lot of people won't realize that, that they can be across different things. So if you
Yeah.
had to, like, I don't know, like staff networks at places of work and stuff, you could fall into more than one category. You
Yeah.
could be LGBTQ plus
Yeah.
and have a disability and be
Yeah.
a woman in technology and
Yeah.
also then be BAME. You could be
Yeah.
across so many different things. But
Yeah.
the thing is, we all need to come together to have these chats because we are in our own marginalized groups, and because we can cross over, we should be
Yeah.
there to support each other and get these messages out there and get people talking.
Yeah, absolutely. That's you're spot on, Kay, there yet again, and yeah, I couldn't agree with you more. And I think things are going in the right direction, but there's still a lot of work to do. And actually, let's just look at let's go back to autism again. And if you look, or being diagnosed as autistic is a privilege. It's
Yeah.
often a privilege that is only offered to white middle class people. That's the reality of it. And if you're Black, or if you're from a working class background, or if you're female, you probably wouldn't get picked up as easily to have a diagnosis in the
Yeah.
first place. So we need to have conversations about this ultimately.
Because as you speak there about the diagnosis and stuff, I know a lot of people at the moment are self-diagnosing themselves,
Yeah.
or they're actually paying to go private because they just want to know.
Yeah.
And apparently, I know people now, they're in the 30s and they haven't got a diagnosis. Some people are in the 40s and they kind of like, I totally represent with autism. I totally am.
Yeah.
And they're all self-diagnosing themselves until they can get a page, because the waiting list here in England, especially, is just so long for people to get
Yeah.
treated.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And as you say, Kay, a lot of people in the UK in their 40s and 50s are now being diagnosed with autism for the first time. And this is completely new because like 20, 30 years ago, it was only young kids that were autistic. We didn't think that adults could actually have autism. And then came along the Rain Man in 1989 with Dustin Hoffman, and that changed everything. And people talk about, oh, the Rain Man, it was so stereotypical. It had a superhero, genius, savant type person in it. But actually, it got the conversation going. And in the 80s, that was what our understanding of autism was.
And as we say again, it's the media that does
Yeah.
this. But we both like media. Is what's one thing, if you could change something today, if you had the power, if you was, I don't know, let's just say DG of a company
Oh, right.
that did media,
Yeah.
what would be the one thing you would want to change about representation of, let's say, either neurodivergent or disabilities within the media?
Wow. I think it's going back to what we said earlier, Kate, to be honest. And I think it's basically, as we said, involving neurodivergence in the conversation right from day one. And I would want to see, I'm passionate about celebrating difference, and also having people working in media from less privileged backgrounds, whoever you are, disabled, black, white, neurodivergent, neurotypical, straight or gay, or whoever you are. And I think it's about getting more representation in media production. And that's the only way we're going to start seeing things differently represented on screen.
Totally agree. So we need to be representing our audiences, and if we don't represent our audience on the inside, then we can't represent it on screen. And if you always do the same thing, then the same thing doesn't change. Like if you always have that same, I know people love to work together, and you've got a fantastic crew, and you're all working on, I don't know, the latest program. And then they always like, oh, see you in 6 weeks for like series 2. It's the same group again. It's the same group of ideas. It's that same education, that same knit tight group. Great, you're making great content, but you're getting no fresh ideas, and you're getting no diversity to that content. So you're always going to be producing the same thing.
Exactly. It's not rocket science, is it?
No,
absolutely.
not to us anyway. Yeah. Maybe we think differently.
Yeah, maybe we do. Yeah, maybe we do. But also, I think there are steps in the right direction, and there's a new documentary coming out. It's got a cinema release on the 18th of June this year, called "The Reason I Jump," and it's been nominated for all sorts of awards in America. It was at the Sundance Festival. And basically, it's groundbreaking, as in it's about people all over the world with autism. And they talk about what it's like to be them, and sometimes they feature non-verbal people, so we hear from a parent that talks about what it's like for them to have that condition. And for the first time on screen, it's a game changer, because it's the first time that a almost like a Hollywood film is coming out to a UK nationwide cinema release, and basically autistic people are producing the film, they are in the film, and the narrative has completely changed. It's about celebrating who they are. It's basically going back to that social model of disability, rather than look at us, aren't we, you should feel sorry for me because I've got a disability. And I think, and this is an exclusive, Kay, but I've got an interview with the directors of the film coming out on my podcast. And, I think it's going to be a game changer. So I'm really excited about that.
No, I've just made a note of it, so I'll go check that out and get it ready for when it comes out. So it's pretty cool that you've got an interview though with the director. I can't wait to hear that, and thank you for your exclusives. But I've made a note there about The Reason I Jump, and I'm sure me and my dad will be heading to the cinema as soon as we can to see that.
I'd love to hear what you think of that, Kay. That would be brilliant. Yeah,
definitely. But speaking about content, we have touched upon the A Word, in which BBC done. Now, whilst I was at the Accessibility Summit for Microsoft this year, I heard about the CRIP camp. So that's meant to be a disabled revolution, and it's a groundbreaking summer camp where a group of teens with disabilities helped build movement, forging a new path towards greater equality. And that's come out on Netflix last year. And I didn't know if you've heard about it before. I've kind of heard of similar sort of stuff in the past, but hadn't really heard about this one.
I haven't heard of that one, but I will be looking out for that. Is that on Netflix, did you say?
Yeah, so it came out on Netflix last year.
Right, amazing. I know there are other really interesting dramas on Netflix. So you've got Atypical as well, is about an autistic young person, and again, your autistic people have been involved in writing the scripts and everything.
Yeah, it was really good, that one.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. So I think we are, as we were saying, the media is definitely evolving and changing, but there's still a fair bit of work to do, I think. Yeah.
No, I totally agree. I think more needs to be done, but it's not a case of, I guess, more needs to be done. It needs to be continuously being done, because everything's going to be always adapting. Language is always going to be being adapted. It's like quite often back in the day when I used to do a lot of interviews for the papers or on air at like different radio stations. And even friends still today, they'll go, oh yeah, okay, she suffers with this. And I'm like, I live with,
Yeah,
like, get it
absolutely.
right, guys.
It's about the language, isn't it, that we use? Yeah.
Yeah. But again, I think when I was speaking to one of my colleagues who's basically profoundly deaf, she was saying to me the biggest thing for her, well, there's a few things. She was basically saying, ask, don't assume what my label is. Don't assume I can't talk, because
Yeah.
she can hear very, very well.
Yeah.
She
Yeah.
says, ask how you want me to
Yeah.
communicate. Do I need closed captions in a meeting? Do I
Yeah.
need a BSL interpreter? Can I just lip read?
Yeah.
It's, don't say I'm hard of hearing, or
Yeah.
hearing impaired. Or this, or it's that. It's
Yeah.
ask the person how they identify
Yeah.
and
Absolutely.
what
Yeah.
language. Because if you're, again, to take, let's say, my own disability,
Yeah.
is I say that I live with it. But then
Yeah.
if you're to speak to some of my friends that have my disability as well, they will say they suffer with it. And
Yeah.
they'll go, no, I do suffer with it. I can't work. I can't do anything. I'm
Yeah.
homebound. I suffer with the condition.
Yeah.
And again, I think it can be a mindset, but I think that's where sometimes media can trip up and go wrong, because they might speak to a load of people which are cool using the word living, and then
Yeah.
they get off
Yeah.
track because someone says suffering. But I think it's important that people ask how they want to be identified.
Absolutely, you're right. It goes back to what we said. People don't want to offend you. People don't
No.
want. People want to try and help, and don't be afraid to ask. And that's the only way that we're going to have change things, is by having an open conversation about things, isn't it? Yeah.
Yeah. And as we see, by us two doing what we're doing in our spaces, I think it's really important. But where
Yeah.
where can people go to find out more about your podcast as well?
Yeah, sure. So, literally, if you just type in the Different Minds podcasts on Google, I'm available on all the podcast platforms, as I'm sure you are as well, Kay. Apple, Spotify, Google, Anchor FM. So yeah, I love your listeners to come and listen to a few of my episodes. But can I just say, Kay, I think your podcast is absolutely amazing, and you've had some really interesting guests. And I think what you're doing is so inspirational, and you're an example of creating a space for people to talk about what it's like to be them. And
Yeah.
I think that's such a powerful thing that you are doing, essentially. Yeah.
It's just, I guess, trying to change people's perception as well. And we are all human. We all have different experiences.
Yeah.
And as we've discussed today with like autism, for example, I've interviewed a lot of people with autism so far, but
Yeah.
none of their journeys are the same. They're all
Yeah.
different.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it's
Absolutely.
so important to get that message across to people.
Yeah, and ultimately we're all human,
Mm.
and we're all different. We come in all different shapes and sizes. Some of us think differently than others, and that's okay. And it's
It is.
okay to be different. And and the people, we've all got our different strengths, and that's what we should be focusing on. And I think in the future, it's so fascinating in terms of where we're going to go in 10, 20 years times. And I think some of the labels, like even the label autism, some people that have suggested to me, high up in academia and that are involved in science and research, saying, will the name autism actually mean anything in 10, 20 years
No.
time?
Well, my name of my condition's already changed since
Yeah.
I've been born. When
Yeah.
I was born, it was known as I can't pronounce it, but here we go. Van Rechlinkenstein's disease is what it
Wow.
was known as. And now
Yeah.
it's neurofibromatosis. To still go for a stupid long word, like what the hell? Like, don't get it.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
But yeah,
Yeah.
they've already changed the name of mine. And since I've been born, they've
Yeah.
now found another, I'm going to say the word variant, because there's now a
Yeah.
neurofibromatosis type 6.
Yeah. Right.
Growing
Right.
up, I was only aware that there's a 1 and a 2, but
Yeah.
now there's
Yeah.
apparently a type 6.
Yeah. Yeah. It constantly changes and evolves,
Yeah.
doesn't it? And that's kind of the I think it's interesting where we're going in 10, 20 years time, and moving away from that medical model of disability that it's
Yeah.
something that needs to be treated essentially.
Yeah, and it might become like, I don't know, more of like a social norm where everything's just accepted. Maybe we
Yeah,
don't have labels, but I think it's as our generations are being brought up into this world,
yeah,
it's people are adapting with the times and
yeah,
changing because that's what they're going to be learning at school when
yeah,
they're growing up and
yeah, yeah,
then later on
absolutely.
into life.
Yeah. And as our understanding of these conditions gets better, then of course that's gonna help everyone out going forward, isn't it? And just to go back on a point that we were talking about when you get diagnosed earlier, and it's even really interesting to look at the actual diagnosis process
Mhm.
because it was very male orientated, and it was designed almost to identify autistic male individuals. And a lot of females were getting missed off the diagnosis because the actual diagnosis procedure was missing, the female people with autism. And essentially, autism presents itself very differently in females as opposed to men. And yet the diagnosis procedure was very focused on diagnosing autism in men. But now
Well,
we know that women can have autism too, and it's presented in a completely different way. And no wonder that it was only men that were getting diagnosed with autism, because the way it was designed was to only pick
it
up
was, it's like it was
autism
built for
in
that
men.
way.
Yeah. So even the actual diagnostic procedure was biased from day one.
Because there's quite a lot of unconscious bias as well
Yeah.
within the world. And
Yeah.
again, I think if we can tap into that and sort out things around unconscious bias, then
Yeah.
we can start to shape and move society forward.
Yeah.
But it's only by people having these conversations,
Yeah.
and it's as I say to people, I don't care if only one person listens to my podcast, because that one person might have that conversation
Yeah.
with someone else, and then it's that domino
Yeah.
thing there where people can then start a conversation.
Absolutely, absolutely. And I'll tell you this as well, Kate. When I first started my podcast, I was interviewing this young guy in America, and he identifies as having Asperger's, and I must admit, I was quite judgmental. I had my own preconceived ideas of maybe this guy's going to be quite manipulative because he's got Asperger's. And, I've been on my own journey of actually not being so judgmental with other people. And I came with all these preconceived ideas of what it's like to have this condition and this condition. And I realized that, wow, I got it so wrong. And, and it's only by having that conversation that I've educated myself. And I hope that people that have been listening to my podcast have been on a similar journey too.
Yeah, and I think that's the thing. I think it's about the education and the willing to learn,
Yeah.
and correcting ourselves as well when
Yeah.
things go wrong, so that we know for next time. Or again, it's as we said before, it's asking
Yeah.
if you're not sure. Because it's
Yeah.
like, again, if I'm to use the deaf hard of hearing community, is I've spoken to one person and she would say I'm hearing impaired
Yeah.
because I can't hear, I'm hearing impaired. But then
Yeah.
you ask somebody else and they'll go, I hate that term.
Yeah.
I'm not hearing impaired, I just can't hear.
Yeah.
And
Absolutely. Yeah.
again, I think it's one of those, you bite your tongue, because it's kind of just like, well, which word do I go for?
Yeah.
And then
Absolutely.
again, it's about asking.
Yeah. 100%. 100%. Yeah.
And you're on Instagram as well,
Yes. Yeah. So
and
it's
people can
just
find you there.
just different minds on Instagram, on something old school called Facebook as well.
What's that?
And also YouTube as well. There's a Different Minds YouTube channel, but it's not as good as yours, Kay. I've got to say that.
No, it will get there, mate. I'm sure it's good. It's just good to give people a different offering
Yeah,
and
definitely. Yeah,
help
definitely.
people out.
Yeah,
Because
absolutely.
my mum prefers to look at people's facial expressions, so then she can
Yeah.
get really into it.
Yeah.
And if I use one of my friends, Tracy, for example, she said she's never once listened to a podcast because they're not made for her because she's deaf. And I'm kind of like, oh, well, I add subtitles to mine to make them accessible. Oh, I didn't know podcasts could do that. So I was like, oh, you could watch on YouTube, because then you can follow along with my lips.
Yeah.
So it's just a good alternative offering.
That's such a good point. And again, I was interviewing someone with Asperger's in Australia, and she was saying how she found it very difficult to take part in a podcast with actually when she wasn't able to see the other person and see their facial expressions, and she wanted to make eye contact with the person that was doing the interviewing. So I think you're right. I think video is really important. Yeah.
It can also help as well. As I used to do when presenting for UK Health Radio, and
Right.
I loved doing it, but my problem is a lot of it was always remote in
Yeah.
it was over the phone.
Yeah.
People didn't go on camera back then,
Yeah.
so
Yeah.
then it was kind of like you're waiting for the gaps to know when
Yeah.
to talk.
Yeah.
Because, and it's kind of, oh, I can go now. And
Yeah.
it's
Yeah.
kind of,
Yeah.
it's trying to
I've
navigate
got to
that.
admit, this is the first, I'm normally doing the interviewing like you, and I've been on a few other podcasts before, but this is the first podcast I've done on a video. So, yeah, it's a first for me today, Kay. So I'm honored to do it. I'm honored to do it on love, life, and disability.
Oh, thank you. Well, we're honoured to actually have you, and it's just so cool to just like catch up, and then hopefully soon enough we can actually meet for a brew
Yeah,
somewhere.
definitely.
Like go for like a Yorkshire tea. I don't know. And we do know Yorkshire has the best tea, right?
Thank you so much. Often life has got ups and downs, but all you need sometimes is a good old cuppa of Yorkshire tea, and that's all you need in
Definitely.
life. That's all you need in life sometimes, isn't it? None of
Yorkshire tea.
this Lancashire tea business.
No, none of that. Or PG tips. Just get a good old Yorkshire brew in you, and you'll be fine.
This is the BBC in me, that there are other brands available, of course. Yeah.
Well, just Yorkshire tea for me.
Yeah, absolutely.
Needs must.
Yeah, definitely.
Well, thank you so much, John. And like I said, hopefully we'll be in person soon.
I hope so. And honestly, it's been such a pleasure speaking to you today, Kay. And yeah, just keep up the good work with your amazing podcast.
Thank you. No, and you too, because, like I say, even if however many people listen, hopefully we can just keep changing society. And without people like ourselves trying to talk and educate people, we're just going to keep doing the same things, and we need to change the agenda.
Yeah. Thank you so much. It's been such a pleasure.
Thank you.
Thank you. Cheers.